the majority of our life is lived in liminal space.
And there's this in-between space, this liminal space.
This liminality that reveals possibility.
I think we're in a liminal moment, but also in a place of transformation.
I have great affection for the church and a troubled relationship with it.
Just to be alive in time means that we're on the threshold of the future.
That can't be the gospel, because God said to love our neighbors.
We don't know what the future looks like. We have to work it out together.
This is a really interesting passage, especially in a germaphobe age, where it's like Jesus spits in the dirt, makes mud, and wipes it on a guy's face. And we're kind of like, that's gross, like there's a little bit of icky grossness to it. But we have to engage the scriptures from their perspective first. Then we can look at it from our perspective. They didn't know about germs and stuff back then and all that kind of stuff. So that's not in their minds like it is in our minds. So if you're kind of like, that's kind of gross, that's all right. That's a modern day looking at it. There's some other things happening in there that we're going to look at. But first, does anyone like optical illusions? Have you ever seen those optical illusions? They really like mess with your eyes and your brain. And it's just like, oh my goodness, what is going on? There's a really famous one that's called the cafe wall illusion. You might recognize it if you see it, and I'm going to show it to you in a minute. But it's actually got its name because it was an actual cafe wall. And here's the wall. In 1979, this psychologist by the name of Richard Gregory, he was walking by a wall in a cafe, and he thought, that looks really weird. There's him right now. Well, back in the day still. But that's what, and he noticed that the way that they did these tiles on this wall created an optical illusion. Like the pattern's really simple. It's just your basic rectangles, but they like staggered them. Instead of doing a classic checkerboard, they staggered them, and it almost makes your eyes think that they're on a diagonal, the way that they're at, because it was messing with his brain. And him being a psychologist was really interested in it, and his brain is expecting to see a grid, almost a checkerboard, and instead his brain was like actually inventing a distortion that wasn't there. So he went back to his lab, and he recreated the pattern. He wanted to see like, how can we like really use this pattern, and what does it tell us about the brain? So he added some gray in between the rows, and here it is in its form. Doesn't that mess with your eyes a little bit? Like you look at it, and it's like everything looks as though it's on an angle, but it's not. They're actually perfect rectangles, but it looks like they're on an angle. And this guy was, he was exploring something called the perceptual confirmation bias, which is our brain's tendency to fill in informational gaps, not with data of what's actually out there, but with what we expect to see, with what we're supposed to see. Our brain has that all figured out. And when something doesn't match that, it starts to play with our mind. So he had a conclusion, psychological conclusion. He says the more confident we are in what we are seeing, the less we actually might be seeing what's really there. Our brain is expecting to see checkerboard grid, and then it doesn't, so it shouldn't be squares. It's actually angles. But when it goes in there, that's your brain filling in informational gaps. That's what optical illusions do. Your brain is filling in informational gaps with what you expect to see instead of what you are seeing. Optical illusions do that. And there's some trippy ones out there. I'm not going to throw any more up there, but this was one that really, like, that messes with my eyes. Have you seen the ones where it looks like the outside is moving if you look at the center, and then you look to the outside and it's not moving at all? And that's your brain doing that thing again. It's filling in the gaps of data of what it expects to see versus what's actually there. So that's not actually angled lines and wedges. Those are really rectangles. And so that's how optical illusions work. Our brain's just messing with us. The John 9 is the story about that, but more like socially. Jesus heals a man who's born blind, and in doing so, he's exposing things all around him. That this man is not the one that can't see, but all these other people that are surrounding him are the ones that actually can't see. The people who have physical sight are the ones that are stumbling in the darkness of expectation and filling in the gaps with all this data of what's supposed to be there. And the man who was born blind is the one who ends up seeing perfectly. So this isn't a story about the miracle. The miracle is pretty cool. I mean, Jesus makes a man who was born blind able to see. But it's really not about the miracle. The story's focus is about what we do with miracles when they disrupt our narratives. When they start saying, well, this is how the world ought to be. This is what I expect from the world. And so I got to hold these narratives to keep things predictable. And then this miracle comes in and totally disrupts the way that we see the world, the way that we expect the world to be, people's places in it, our own place in it. And so this story is almost like an optical illusion in narrative form. Now, notice how the passage opens with a phrase, as he walked along. As Jesus is just kind of walking along here. Where did he come from? Where did he go? Cotton Eye Joe. That's that song is going to be in my head now forever. Sorry about that. But where did he come from? What was he up to? Like, Jesus, he's not just taking a leisurely stroll and he's like, oh, look at over there. There's a blind man. I think I'll go do some charitable work. There's something else happening. In the chapter right before this, Jesus narrowly escapes being stoned to death. So he's actually running for his life in this passage. And it just starts off with his leisurely as he was walking along. But if you read the passage right before this, Jesus challenged some temples in their religious zone called the temple on a feast time. This is one of the big three feasts called the Feast of Tabernacles. And he made a whole bunch of people mad with some stuff that he said, and they have authority. So they pick up rocks and they're about to kill him. And he just kind of slips out of the crowd. So he's walking fast, kind of fleeing for his life at this point. He's like, it's not time for me to die yet. So I got to go. So he runs. And as he's fleeing for his life, he looks over and sees this guy. And I like that the verb says Jesus sees the man. Like, of course he does, but that verb there is almost intentional because no one else notices the man. Jesus sees him for not just like there's a blind man over there, but he actually sees him for who he is, because all the other people, this is a very crowded area of the city, and all the other people have already seen him and they've already filled in the gaps of who he is and his whole narrative is. And their brains have already told a narrative about who that guy is and what his place in the world is, like the cafe wall illusion, but socially. They just kind of walk past him without seeing him anymore. But it says here that Jesus sees the man. And so he goes on over. And the disciples ask this question. They say, well, who sinned? Was it this man or was it his parents? That's a really wow, that reveals the narrative there. The disciples notice this guy too. No one else notices him. I like that their first response is kind of curiosity, but it's not very compassionate. It's like, what's wrong with this guy, Jesus? It's classification. It takes a human being and classifies them. And the question sounds theological, doesn't it? Like, well, whose sin made this man blind? Was it his own sin or was it his parents' sin? And that's actually a distancing mechanism, because in first century Jewish thought, disability and poverty were widely understood as divine punishment for something. There was a rabbinic saying that said, there is no death without sin and there is no suffering without iniquity. So your social position was considered evidence of God's opinion of you. And so that question reveals it. Who sinned, this man or his parents? And it reveals that they see the man, but they don't really see the man. But it says that Jesus sees the man. The disciples notice and then bring up this whole polarity way of thinking about the man. So are you poor? Are you disabled? Are you widowed? Something you did, something your parents did has brought this on your head is the thought of the day, of that day. No compassion is needed. That logic was airtight in their minds. It was tidy, but it was also deeply cruel. And you're thinking maybe like, wow, that's so ancient. I'm glad we live in a different kind of society, right? Or maybe you're like, wow, that still is in operation today. Sometimes we dig to disguise that in modern day with like this weaponized theological language of sin and salvation, allowing religious people to other those outside of their theological systems and their ways of thinking. But this is not really just religious theology they're talking about. This is the ideology of how organized empire systems of power work. They have always needed to explain inequality that exists inside of their walls in a way that's friendly to themselves. This is how human power structures work. We have to locate the problem, not in the thing that we have built and holds us up, but we have to locate the problem in the body of the person who's suffering, never the structure that it was built in. So the disciples' question is within that framework there. They have been taught to think inside of that framework. All of their questions, all of their thinking is stuck inside of a small frame that says God will dish out based on merit. Those who deserve good things will get good things, and those who don't will not. And that is the thinking that is inside. They don't know how to think outside of that. And so we can't really discredit the disciples so much because they're just thinking what everyone else around them is thinking, but they at least ask the question. They at least want more information. They're at least saying, we know this Jesus guy is different. I wonder what his take is on this. But what it does is it places responsibility for systemic suffering on the individual, and in doing so protects this community from confronting its own complicity in making this man poor. So we hear echoes of it everywhere, right? Like, well, why don't you just get a job? Same theology. Well, if you followed the rules, you wouldn't be in this situation, right? Same theology. Well, it's all just in your head. If you would just be able to just think outside of that way of thinking, same theology. It's a functional theology that says that merit is what God bases the world on and God's grace on. See, these aren't neutral observations. They're theological claims about who deserves compassion and who deserves exclusion. And empires are ways of making peace with suffering by blaming the victim. And blame is the theology of those who have never really had to fight for their humanity. This man has been poor since birth. This man has been blind since birth. He's been sitting by the road and heard this theology his entire life. He's actually been assigned a government-issued mat and a government-sanctioned place at the margins of society and says, this is where your place is. He had to go and register for a poor man's mat to sit on. And then they said, well, this is the place you're allowed to sit. Don't sit over here, over here, over here. Sit there and then beg for your money to keep you alive. That's this man's whole existence. He's fully dependent upon the charity of people who believe that he's there because he deserves to be. What would that feel like? He's not a person to them. He's a religious commodity that can help them fulfill their charity quotas. That's what these people are looking at this man like. Have you ever felt like that in the eyes of someone else? They looked at you and they're just like, poor, poor little person. Like that's what this man feels like, except it enshrouds his whole life. He's been there since birth. But the logic of love demands solidarity with those who have been crushed. And this is what Jesus is trying to teach him. And I think too often, like the church has built theologies that make peace with poverty and suffering by spiritualizing our theologies, as if the point of someone's hardship is the lesson that it's supposed to teach them. Well, they're going through a hard time so that they can learn this and then that, right? But the logic of love is like, no, that's not what we do. We don't distance ourselves from those in suffering. We come near. We stand next to. Those who have been crushed by all the expectations that society has put on them or their families put on them or the churches have put on them, those people need us the most to come next to them and say, I see you. And maybe you felt that before. Like nobody really sees and understands this thing that I have to carry. And if I say it, they're going to think that I'm weak. But here, Jesus is like, I see this man and all these societal expectations that are a weight that he's been carrying his whole life is like weighing upon his shoulders. The way that I do pastoring is a way that I have been repenting of that system of thinking for much of my young pastorate life. So if it feels a little differently here, like this way that I do pastoring is my act of ongoing repentance for how I used to be. I used to be a fundamentalist. I used to bring the hammer down. I used to Bible thump and preach. I used to do all of that stuff. And so this way that I do preaching now in just a plaid and trying to serve the community and love everybody that I can, that's my act of repentance ongoing and saying, I sowed too many seeds of that violent way of doing the faith, and I need to do it differently. And I love that you let me. Thank you so much. This is my deep repentance and apology to who I used to be in the world as a way of doing things differently. Because there's theology that I use to prop up my own blessed life experience, right? So part 2, the muddy miracle. Jesus does not answer the disciples' questions. He does not look at them and be like, well, he does, first of all, he doesn't call them dumb. Very important. Maybe he gives them the side eye. I would give them the side eye. Right? He's like, well, who sinned, this guy or his parents? Because obviously something went wrong somewhere. And Jesus doesn't answer the disciples' question. He dismantles their question. That's the best way to answer a question, really. Like sometimes people ask a question and I'm like, that question's too small, right? So you got to help dismantle the logic behind the question and help see a bigger picture. That's what Jesus is doing here. And he does that with one word, neither. Because we get caught in either or thinking. Our brains love either or thinking. Are you a good guy or bad guy, right? Like, are you the protagonist or the antagonist, right? Or are you the, like, we just go into that either or thinking really fast. It's a natural brain default. And they're just like, the binary system in their brain was like, who sinned, him or his parents? Like, something brought this on this guy. And Jesus's word, neither, like, just looks at that question and say, that's the wrong question to ask. He says, neither this man nor his parents sinned. And that word neither is doing all of that work of dismantling that small little frame that holds that question up and props it up. It breaks open that either or logic that's trapped this man's entire life within the framework of blame. And then Jesus reframes the situation entirely. He says, not as judgment from the past, but as possibility for the future. That's something that this man has never had. He has this mat and he has a spot and he has to sit there and beg for money from people who don't like him. That's his whole existence. He's never had possibility. He's never had hope. He's never had future. And Jesus looks at this man and he's like, it was neither this man's sin or his parents, but for the glory of God may be revealed in this situation. Fancy religious language of saying there's hope and possibility in this man's life that he's never seen before. A blind man, turns out, is going to help everybody see better. I love that. So then Jesus does something strange. Could have healed him with a word. He does that elsewhere. He even healed a man when he wasn't even present. He's like, heal my servant, please. Like, all right, it's done. Let's go home. But here he does something different. He bends down, spits in the dirt, makes some mud with his hands, spreads it on the man's eyes. And this is the part that makes some of us germaphobes a little bit squeamish. And you're like, ew, no, thank you. Like, could you just wave a wand or something? That would be much better. I got to thinking, like, how much spit would it take? Have you ever tried to make mud out of your own spit? I mean, how long did that take? Like, that could have gotten awkward fast. It's like, hold on, guys. Can I get a drink of water? I'm out. You know, I was like, good Lord. He spreads it on the man's eye, not as a parlor trick. Like, we like to think of Jesus had all these like magic tricks and godlike superpowers, and he doesn't. He's doing everything from the role of a human prophet. He's not doing it from, he gave up all of his rights and claims and powers and knowledge as God. That's what the theology tells us. So he doesn't have like X-Men superpowers in his back pocket. He's like, you know what? Watch this, guys. I'm going to walk on water. It's cool. If God didn't ask him to do walking on the water in that moment, he would have sunk like everybody else. He has to follow the leading of the Spirit through the power of the Spirit, just like everybody else did. So he doesn't have like these godlike superpowers that happens there. He just, this is something else going on. Why mud? Why make mud and spread it on the guy's eyes when you could just say the word and he'd be healed? Well, I think John opens with the words, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. That in the beginning echoes the book of Genesis. So John likes to pull from the book of Genesis quite often in his stories. And what does God do on the sixth day of creation but bends down in the dirt, forms the clay, and breathes life into it, and there's a human soul. That's their creation narrative. And so here we see this man's eyes have not been working since birth. And Jesus takes these creative forces of mud, just like Yahweh did back in the book of Genesis. And he's like, just like God formed humans from the clay, there's a part of you that was never formed. And we're going to form out of the clay now. He spreads it on the man's eyes. It's a creation act. It's deliberately echoing Genesis 2, where God forms humans from dust of the ground and breathes life into it. So Jesus is doing what Yahweh from the Old Testament does, reforming what was incomplete and creating again from the clay. I love that. That's pretty cool. And the mud in the story teaches us that the sacred doesn't arrive in spite of the physical. It arrives through it. This is really cool. Like the incarnation theology, that's a fancy word for God putting on human flesh and dwelling amongst us. The incarnation is not God tolerating a human body until he can escape it and go back to being a cool spiritual being. It's God declaring that human flesh is the preferred medium of divine presence. Like God had a choice on how to show up in this world. He's like, you know what the best way to do? Through human beings. There's this tendency in a lot of Western Christianity to make the faith abstract into like a set of mental propositions and spiritual transactions. You know, there's a personal problem that we have, sin, that gets a personal spiritual solution called salvation, that you have to pray this prayer and then all of a sudden, magic happens and you're good. Right? But that's so small way of thinking about the gospel, because their understanding of the gospel that was first heard by these poor people under an oppressive Roman occupation, it was communal survival tactics. It was more than just idealized theology. It was like, how do you remain faithful to Yahweh in this situation that you're in? How can you, as a Hebrew person that worships, remain faithful in this Roman occupied area that you're in? It was embodied, it was communal, and it was irreducibly material. It was really about the human life. And I try to do this when I do a funeral. I try to take all the spiritualized language and just bring it down to what does that look like in the human experience? And I actually got chewed out by a fundamentalist pastor once because I was, quote, preaching secular humanism. And I'm like, there's nothing secular about being a human. God was a human. God dwelled in human flesh. The human experience is the most holy thing you can experience. Like, holy cow. But he's used to spiritualizing and idealizing things. But the mud matters. The spit matters. The dirt road that's crowded in this city, they all matter. And we can't diminish the faith into ideas about the faith. We have to turn it into, how does this work here in my lived experience and today? And not just slap fancy religious language on stuff and try to, cliche our way through life. We have to figure out, how does the faith work here in my existence, in this world, in this town, in my family, in my job? That's what Jesus is doing here. That's what the incarnation asks us to do. And it's not the mud that heals the man. He can't see yet. He's got mud on his eyes. It's actually the washing that does it. Jesus sends the man to this thing called the pool of Siloam with mud on his face. That's a half mile. Here's a map of the city of Jerusalem. There's the temple, that white box I just there. The pool of Siloam down there, that white box. Half a mile through one of the most crowded streets in the most crowded time, which is a big, huge festival called the Feast of Tabernacles. He's blind. He has to navigate by sound and touch, and he's carrying this vulnerability that makes him visible in the most public way possible. Like, what is this guy doing? He's trying to work his way through this crowded street. Have you ever tried to get through? You're going to the county fair or something, and it's just I just need the elephant ear, but there's all these people in my way, right? Now imagine being blind and trying to do that. Jesus sends this man to this pool. Here's a picture of what the pool would have looked like. And it's not a neutral location. This is not just some, there's some water over there. There's water that was closer. He picked this one for a specific reason. This was a pool that was made by King Hezekiah when the Assyrian armies in, I believe it was 700 AD, somewhere in that area. I can't remember the exact date. They were on Jerusalem's doorstep, and they were an army that was laying siege to the city. And they're like, let's just cut them off from all food and water. And they built this tunnel that brought water in and filled up this pool. And so they saw this pool as a place, a physical place of God's provision during a difficult time. But then they started to make political alliances with these people. And so Isaiah 8 says that this symbol of God's provision was actually, it was a symbol of the people's failure to trust that provision and instead trust in all of their political alliances with Assyria, and it backfired on them. And so this pool has all that history to it. It was made and it provided water during a difficult time. And then they turned their backs on God, made all these political alliances, and then they were overwhelmed by the Babylonian armies. And so that is a symbol, and it's all spelled out in Isaiah chapter 8 in this passage. So during the Feast of Tabernacles, they would come down to this water, and the priest would take some water out, they'd mix it with wine, they'd pour it out at the altar to commemorate the water that God gave Israel when they were wandering in the wilderness back in the days of Moses. So sending this man there is layered with all of that meaning. And he goes, and then he washes, and then he can see. It's not there. The mud didn't do it. It's this man's obedience that did it. The people who knew him, the ones who had seen him begging at the gate every day, just cannot process what they're seeing. Like, isn't this that guy? He used to sit and beg, and some are like, yeah, that's him. And others are like, nah, he just looks like the guy. It can't be him. They're unsure because the version of him that they decided on doesn't match the version that they're seeing. And that's that optical illusion again, the social optical illusion. They've already made up their minds about who this man is and where his place is. And now he's standing in a different way among them, and they don't know what to do with it. And it's this optical social illusion for them. And they're trying to, what narrative, the one that we had doesn't work. So what narrative do we put on this guy? Guess what? Other people's discomfort with your decision to get better is not your problem. If you decide to get better and all of a sudden you don't fit inside of people's narratives about you, that isn't your problem. They stopped looking at him and started confirming what they expected to see. And Jesus essentially is raising the socially dead in this passage. And he makes visible in a new way this person in the community that they had already decided what to do with and where his place was. And it made them uncomfortable. But other people's discomfort with that decision was not his problem either. So if you make decisions to make your life better, and all of a sudden people around you are like, but you used to do this, that's not your problem. So then the interrogations come up, because this makes a lot of discomfort in this community. And what follows is one of the longest, most legally structured interrogation scenes in the whole Gospels. I think it outdoes even the passion interrogations and stuff with Jesus. It's like 20 verses, 3 rounds with the healed man, 1 round with his parents. And the Pharisees have this problem. This man is walking proof that Jesus is not who they think he is. Remember, they just tried to kill him. And so this man is walking proof that he's not who he think he is. Which means that everything that they've built and structured their whole mindset around might be wrong. And so they can either question that and rebuild it, or they can double down. And it's really hard to question the foundational things that you hold your narratives together, that hold your world together. And so we often don't, because it's easier not to. But it's a whole lot better if we all do the honest, curious work of looking at the narratives we hold about our place, their place, and God and all this thing, and say, what is real and true? Now, these Pharisees don't do that. They're very uncomfortable, but they're not stupid. And they're not simply malicious. They're experts. They're masters of the religious tradition, and they've assembled all the right information, right? Sabbath law is very real for them. And their concern about false prophets, very legitimate for them. They're trying to look out for their peoples. But as Jesus has been showing throughout John's Gospels, you can have all the correct information assembled, but the way that you put it together isn't good. Now, is any archers in here? Anybody do archery? I did some target archery. I was good for a while. I won a competition. Okay, first place. I was pretty good. I haven't shot in about 15 years, maybe longer. I got to get that out again. It was fun. I had a lot of fun target shooting. But I noticed that Like this one time I shot and part of the fletching on my arrow got wrecked, but I didn't have another arrow. So I'm like, no big deal. It's only a little piece of feather. Boy, is it a big deal. All of a sudden my arrow's like flying all over the place, right? And so there's a big difference between facts and truth. A huge difference between facts and truth. You can have all the facts, but if you don't assemble those facts true, it's not going to fly. That's why they say an arrow flies true, because I can't build an arrow. I got all the pieces, but I am not an artesian arrow building person. Like I just can't do it. But you give all those pieces to someone who can assemble something, that arrow is going to fly true. They're going to know the weight balance ratios. They're going to know the angles you need on the fletching. They're going to know all that stuff. And so these Pharisees, they got all the religious facts down. They got them all assembled. But every time they put them together and shoot the arrow, they're aiming for righteousness, but it hits injustice and oppression every time because they're not assembling it true. And so Jesus comes, all the same facts that they have, all the same scriptures that they have, and he then rearranges it all and aims it towards love God and love your neighbor, and all of a sudden he's direct hit every time. And the Pharisees are like, but that's not how we make arrows. And they're upset with him. Their arrows keep veering. And that's actually the biblical definition of sin, is to miss the mark you aim for. That's the biblical. We like to put it into like personal moral failures and all these other things. And it's maybe it encompasses that a little bit, but it's really like we have the best of intentions, but we can never seem to hit the mark. And the we there is important. We tend to individualize sin, and then all of a sudden we adopt shame and guilt in like in abundance in ways that we don't have to or shouldn't need to. Because if I were to sit down with any one of us, I think we would all want pretty much the same thing, right? We all want to see justice. We want to see equality. We want to see provision, safety, security, prosperity. All of us want most of the same stuff. But whenever we gather together and build organized systems, right, like it seems to never hit that. That's what I think human sin is our collective ability to never hit what we're aiming at. And so it's not a me and my sin kind of a thing so much as it is the way that we assemble ourselves never seems to work, never seems to hit the mark. And so we as a church need to become a small microcosm of the thing that we hope to see in the world and do it very, very like locally, right here in our own community. And so these interrogations they follow the pattern. There are first theory. Well, Jesus can't be from God because he healed on the Sabbath. Bam. Also, he made a ruckus in the temple, and we really didn't like that. Second theory, when the first one failed. It's like, well, he is standing here, and he can see now. Maybe he was never actually blind, so call the parents. Parents are like, nah, actually he was. So they know, the parents are afraid, though. That shows them something. So they bring the man back in, try and get him to then discredit Jesus. And he's like, look, I don't really know if he's a sinner or not. Here's all I know. I was blind, now I'm seeing. That's the thing I know. This man refuses to be put back where they found him. He will not perform the expected role. And he has nothing left to lose, and therefore nothing left to fear. That there shows it. He shows us that those who have nothing left to lose are often the ones free enough to tell the truth. And so the Pharisees escalate from questioning to insult to expulsion. They throw him out. You're done here. And this is how power always responds to transformation it didn't authorize. Investigate, discredit, exclude. Their questions are not designed to discover the truth. They're designed to protect a narrative that upholds the systems that they have built. And Jesus' final words to the Pharisees are absolutely devastating. He says, if you were blind, you would have no sin. But since you say, we can see, your sin remains. And that's the Jesus mic drop. He's just placed the label of blindness on the people who can physically see, and he's placed the label of sin on those who claim authority to distribute that label to others. And the problem, Jesus says, is not ignorance, it's certainty. Their absolute confidence that they already know what God does, where God acts, and whom God favors is precisely the condition that makes them unable to see God standing in front of them. Certainty is a form of spiritual blindness. That cafe wall illusion works because the brain prefers patterns and expectations over chaos and disruption. That psychologist, Gregory, his insights was that the more certain we are, the less we're actually looking. It's our brain's default filter. And Lent actually engages the filter directly by challenging our assumptions. It's not a spiritual self-improvement program. It's a season designated to disrupt our perceptions of certainty in order to reteach us how to see, not just what to see. Because the most dangerous blindness is the kind that doesn't know it's blind. So, Lent takes us to our pool of Siloam, where we can wash the mud off and start seeing again.